to get the singing feeling you were going to start off with that.
Yeah. Well,
Why
welcome,
do
ladies
you
and
think
gentlemen.
I did say a word? Right, people, there are people in the chat. Come and say hello. Five
Going already.
Let's
Yeah.
go.
Just don't get naked. Yeah. There we go. We threw it out there.
Keep all your clothes on tonight, folks.
Yeah.
So, we're up to 7. MJ, say hello. Let me know that you can hear us.
It's growing.
It's,
Hello, Rita. Oh.
hi, Nigel. Hi, about Bill.
So, welcome to a very special episode, or crossover episode, if you will, of Nick Files to the Grave and Back and Frighteners. And I'll be taking over this time, and I gotta say, I got quite a very powerful presentation to present. Very quick, what's up, Wayne? Good to see you. Pickle Tom's in the house.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Wayne.
So, I know I didn't really make too much of an announcement over this, but this is one of the few times that this will be a 2-hour special, because I have, again, quite a presentation for you guys, not just for the audience, but for you guys as well. Considering that tomorrow is September 8th, which marks the anniversary of a very destructive hurricane, we'll be focusing, I did this last year, but once again, we'll be focusing on the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900. And the story that you guys are about to see is going to be very powerful.
Hey, okay, Wilson, honey.
Oh, yeah. And see, yeah, sorry to hear that, Irene. And that's the other thing, too. Honestly, by doing this presentation, it's probably also an important time, especially considering it's very high hurricane and typhoon season right now, with, of course, Hurricane Lee that's heading currently on its way, possibly to the U.S. They haven't really figured out the full path yet. So I think, honestly, this is certainly this is definitely a very good time to really present such an event like this. So I just wanted to say very quick, Lois, Rosie, and Grizzly, I already told you guys, but for anyone who's going to be watching the entire show, I just want to warn you guys, this might get a little bit emotional, because this is quite a sad story. I mean, we're talking about the worst natural disaster in the country's history. So, but that will probably be in the later part of the show, because we're not just going to be talking about the hurricane. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the city of Galveston, as well as a very important meteorologist who did as hard as he could to try to save his fellow neighbors, friends, and the residents of Galveston. So without further ado, I'm going to let Lois take over the comments for anybody who says anything. And
I just want to point out, guys, if you hear sniggering in the background, my man's actually got the headphones on watching the TV, just in case Andy thinks he's been disrespectful. He's actually watching NCIS, laughing at Gibbs. So if you hear sniggering from time to time, folks, that's all it is. He's totally listening to Gibbs.
I just want to say one other thing just before we get started. I mean, was there anything else that you guys wanted to bring up quickly before we get started? You guys have any questions, or you guys?
I want to also wish Rosie, she's taken time out and she's joined us tonight.
It's great to have you back.
Welcome back, my love.
Clapping noise.
Yeah.
I have one comment.
Yeah.
If you haven't voted for me, I'm trying to be on the
yes, vote for her, please. We already did.
Yeah, so anyone that's watching, because I don't know most of these people, except I know Irene. So, but if you haven't voted on my main page, which I don't know if you know what that is, look it up under Rhonda Alston. Or you can ask Nick for the link or somebody else for the link. Vote for me. Today is at 7 p.m. Pacific time is the end, and they're cutting 5 more people from who they cut last week. I don't know how many people they cut last week, but there was 20. There was like 20 in my group. I don't know how many there was overall, but they cut the first 20, and then they're doing the top 15 now. So if you'll please go vote for me, it's free. It doesn't cost anything. If you do want to donate, it goes to a good cause. So that it'll tell you the details of what it goes for and what the cause is if you want to donate money. So thank you.
Is there anything else, or you guys?
No, carry on, love. Carry on.
let me just go through this fun technique. I always have issues trying to get the screen shared like this.
I'm probably going to, though, turn my camera off so I can go get some caffeine because I might have a headache because of caffeine.
That's no big deal. All right, hang on one second because it's a lot easier to do this on the laptop than doing it on the desktop. So bear with me for just a second. I'm trying to get to the main slideshow. I know this. They really need to update this way of sharing screens. Okay, I think we're good to go. So let me know if you guys can see this. All right, can you guys see the slideshow?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. So without further ado, let's begin. So as I just said, we'll be focusing on what I like to call Isaac Storm, the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900, which Isaac Storm is actually based on the book by Eric Larson, who wrote about this man by the name of Isaac, which we'll get to in a little later, as well as the hurricane in 1900. So right before we get started with the history, we're going to start off with the most recent storm to ever have occurred in Galveston. It's going to be very brief. So the most recent one that occurred was September 14th, 2021. Galveston, Texas is in the grip of Hurricane Nicholas, a Category 1 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. The eye of the storm is still several hours away, but massive waves are already crashing on the seawall. This 17-foot high barrier is the island's best hope and defense for survival. It's also a reminder of the worst natural disaster in the country's history more than almost 125 years ago. Galveston, Texas. Sorry, looks like there might have been a mix-up with the fade-in, so excuse the glitches. So Galveston, Texas. At the turn of the century, it's one of the most exciting cities in the United States. Known as the Wall Street of the Southwest, as it houses 5 of Texas's largest banks, it was the 5th largest city in Texas, but the wealthiest by far. It was an era of grandeur and opulence, grace and charm. Galveston had many magnificent homes, castle-like houses, quaint Victorian cottages, and ornate business buildings. It was the first, even more interestingly, it was the first city to have electricity in Texas, along with gas lighting, telephone, telegraphs, and railroad service between the town and anywhere in the United States. At the 1900 census, the city's population is 37,789 people. Believe it or not, it was the 3rd richest city in the United States at that time. In less than 10 years, Galveston had grown by a staggering 30%. Like many port towns, Galveston is a diverse city, teeming with sailors, European immigrants, and black laborers. It's a city of well-kept churches, tree-lined boulevards, and dozens of saloons. Galveston owes its success to good timing and geography. The island hosts a bustling deep seaport, perfectly situated to handle the country's thriving cotton and agricultural trade. The business district is headquartered in the Strand, named after a famous London street. This was the financial center not only of Galveston County, but the entire state of Texas. Merchants could bring in goods off the boats directly out of the back of their buildings and out the fronts. The city of Galveston, formerly founded in 1839, had weathered numerous storms, all of which the city survived with ease. In the late 19th century, Galveston was a boom town, with the population increasing from 29,084 people in 1890 to, as I mentioned, 37,789 people in 1900. The city was the 4th largest municipality in terms of population in the state of Texas in 1900 and had among the highest per capita income rates in the U.S. The city's position on the natural laborer of Galveston Bay along the Gulf of Mexico made it the center of trade in Texas and one of the busiest ports in the nation. With this prosperity came a sense of complacency, as residents believe any future storms would be no worse than previous events. A quarter of a century earlier, the nearby town of Indianola on Matagorda Bay was undergoing its own boom. Then, in 1875, a powerful hurricane blew through and nearly destroyed the town. Indianola was rebuilt, though a second hurricane in 1886 caused most of the town's residents to move elsewhere, along with a third hurricane that destroyed the remnants of Indianola, marking the official abandonment of the town. And this was actually a photo, one of the few photos that was taken. I believe it was from the 1886 hurricane that struck Indianola. But now most of those structures are completely gone. So there's almost nothing remains standing the original Indianola. Many Galveston residents took the destruction of Indianola as an object lesson on the threat posed by hurricanes. Galveston is built on a low flat island, little more than a large sandbar along the Gulf Coast, about 30 miles long and 3 miles wide, connected to the mainland by 3 railroad trestles and a wagon bridge. Its highest elevation is less than 9 feet above sea level. To the north, the shallow waters of Galveston Bay. To the south, the Gulf of Mexico. While the north edge of the island is all business, the Gulf side is all pleasure. Galvestonians strolled the breezy beaches and enjoyed the shade under the giant bathhouses. Sometimes I forget there's a few photos that follow right before we get to the next slide.
Robert was saying, modern society, it took 3 days to get water to the Superdome after Katrina.
Oh, I'm not surprised. I mean, I know exactly what he means by that.
That doesn't really surprise me either. It's terrible.
The nearest big city is Houston, about 50 miles inland. Although Houston has 7,000 more people than Galveston, it's not nearly as prosperous or sophisticated. The two cities compete for shipping revenues, a rivalry that stirred from the late 1800s when a hurricane caused heavy damage in Galveston. Galvestonians often looked down on their neighbor to the north, as Houston was just a little country town in those days. Houston was often referred to in Galveston to as Mudville, as people would often hold their noses when they talked about Houston. So you had those certain city rivalries at that time. Houston officials said it proved their city was better protected, making it more suitable for commerce. All that stands between the sea and the city is a streetcar trestle running precariously along the shore, which this is a photo of the actual trestle. Hurricanes have struck the island of Galveston long before it ever became a city and long before the United States was born. And while Texas was also still considered Mexican territory, going as far back as nearly 500 years, records show that hurricanes had previously hit the island in 1527, 1766, 1818, 1837, 1839, 2 in 1842, 1854, 1877, and 1891. Many other additional hurricanes may have also hit the island through the centuries, but were probably never documented and have been lost to time. For years, Galveston local officials considers building a breakwater, but the plan is dismissed, and nothing had ever been approved. City leaders don't want to project the image that Galveston might not be safe. Though these residents proposed a seawall be constructed to protect the city, but the majority of the population and the city's government dismissed their concerns, as to them it wasn't such a major concern. Among these, now this is kind of part 2 already of the slideshow. Like I said, it's kind of a combination. So here's pretty much like part 2, if you will. Among those against building a seawall was Galveston's chief weather expert, Isaac Klein. Born near Madisonville, Tennessee, on October 13, 1861, to Jacob and Mary Klein, the older of 2 sons of the prosperous farmer. As a young man, Isaac develops a love for nature and the shifting seasons of the Smoky Mountains.
Hey, Dawn.
Who's on?
Dawn and Paul. Well, I don't know if I'm saying this guy's name right. You'll need to check for me.
I'll try to see. Like again, I can't see this when I'm doing this.
All right, it's Paru.
Young Isaac is also captivated by the possibilities of a different frontier, science. In the wake of the Civil War, technology is transforming America. The telephone, electric light, and phonograph were all invented during Isaac's teenage years. And with the spread of the railroad comes the prospect that a vast and hostile land will soon be tamed. In 1878, Isaac Klein enters nearby Hiwassee College, where he excels in mathematics, chemistry, physics, Latin, and Greek. He also develops a fascination with the cutting-edge field of meteorology. In 1882, 20-year-old Isaac is recruited and joins the Weather Service of the United States Army Signal Corps, which is later renamed the U.S. Weather Bureau. At this time, it's just a far-flung system of observation posts. Its forecasts are notoriously inaccurate, and its observers have a reputation for independence and corruption. There was a lot of scandals going on. A lot of the offices were being used for other activities besides studying meteorology. To survive, the Weather Bureau would have to clean up its act. Isaac Klein was considered the Weather Bureau's great hopes. He was intelligent, he was aware, and participated in the latest scientific investigations of his day. He wanted to bring the expertise and that level of professional behavior and deportment or demeanor to the Weather Service. He rose through the ranks in various cities. Isaac begins his career as a forecaster in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1883 in order to take daily readings as well as to observe the Rocky Mountain locusts and the relationship between their behavior and the climate. The locusts evidently learned that Isaac had been put on their trail and disappeared. Things were really limited back then. Basically, what they could see is what they could measure. They could measure the temperature with thermometers as well as pressure with barometers. Some of them had hydrometers to measure the humidity, which was about it, as they were very focused on just what they could see right in the immediate vicinity. So, essentially a lot of these tools they had, the early days of meteorology, as you would probably very well imagine, it was very limited. So you only had just really the few amount of tools that could really detect certain changes in weather, and particularly even such swarms like the Rocky Mountain locusts at that time. So didn't see much in those days, but for the most part, it was all they had, of course. It doesn't take long for Isaac to make a name for himself within the Bureau. He had an inexhaustible level of energy and curiosity. He was a multitasker before the term had ever been invented. In addition, in spare time in Little Rock, to doing all the observations that were demanded of a full-time observer, he went to medical school and graduated and earned a doctor of medicine from the University of Arkansas in 1885 and became a physician. He also begins duties at Fort Concho Weather Station. Later in Abilene, he helps edit The Reporter, which was a daily and weekly newspaper. Isaac was very ahead of his time and was very well respected because he had 2 college degrees. Most people at that time only had 4th grade education or less. So he was definitely someone, who really knew what he was doing when he was going through his studies and what position that he was looking to take part in. Isaac even finds time for less scientific pursuits. In 1886, after being transferred to Abilene, Texas, he met Corome Bellew, an organist at the local church. Within a year, they married on March 17, 1887. Isaac Klein had a reputation for being a very stern person. Corome, on the other hand, was someone who everyone loved. She had long red hair and was supposed to be a lot of fun, very foreign friendly, outgoing, and gregarious. On December 10th, Their first child, Allie Mae, was born. 2 more daughters, Rosemary and Esther, are born over the next 6 years. In March 1889, 27-year-old Isaac received an honorable assignment. A Texas section of the Weather Bureau was being established, and he is chosen to head the U.S. Weather Bureau's office in the thriving port city of Galveston to organize and oversee it. Isaac Klein and his family arrive in the early part of that year and are nearly overwhelmed by their good fortune. By 1890, 28-year-old Klein settles in as head of the city's U.S. Weather Bureau's office, which is located on the 3rd floor of the Levy Building on 23rd Street in the heart of downtown. He spends each day taking readings and collecting meteorological data. Each day, Klein and his staff telegraph the data to Weather Bureau headquarters in Washington, D.C. Klein stayed with the office when it became part of the U.S. Weather Bureau in the 1891 transfer from the Signal Corps to the Department of Agriculture. In 1892, Isaac's younger brother, 21-year-old Joseph Klein, also begins work as a meteorologist at the Galveston Weather Bureau. In 1895, Klein introduces the Weather Bureau to the 24 to 36-hour forecasts. And sorry, the picture was supposed to show up before that, but this was the only photo I was able to find of Isaac's younger brother, Joseph. That same year, the Klein brothers receive a new boss when President Grover Cleveland names 39-year-old Willis Moore to head the National Weather Bureau, who was a very controlling and ambitious man. One of his top priorities was to bring the Weather Bureau a higher level of credibility. During his time in Galveston, aside from running the weather office, Isaac Klein also taught Sunday school at his church, was a professor at the local medical college, and in 1896 earned a Doctor of Philosophy degree from Adran Male and Female College, which today is now known as Texas Christian University. But the consequences of Moore's ambition will soon leave the city of Galveston dangerously vulnerable. In years past, those local observations would have included data from Cuban forecasters who had pioneered the science of hurricane prediction. In April of 1898, 2 months after the sinking of the USS Maine off the coast of Cuba, the Spanish-American War begins. For years, the U.S. Weather Bureau had relied on Cuban observers to transmit storm warnings to the American mainland. But now with Cuba under U.S. military control, the U.S. government installed and assigns its own observers to the island, which I got to say, I'm just going to say right now, that was really unfortunate that they wanted to assign their own observers, because if you think about it, whether you know this or not, back in the 1890s and early part of the 20th century, the Cuban meteorologists probably were probably among some of the best in the world, because they had all these different, instruments of barometers, anemometers, basically everything, especially when it was coming to predicting hurricanes. But of course, that all changed in this case, for when the Spanish-American War occurred.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. weather observers felt that the residents of Cuba were a little better than Aboriginals. They also felt a little bit threatened by the Cuban meteorologists. Washington believed the Americans were more scientific and therefore more credible. Excuse me, I'm having trouble with that word. Yes, thank you. Credible than their Cuban counterparts. In the I just forgot I had this. Yeah, in the 1890s and early part of the 20th century, the Cuban forecasters were probably the best in the world for understanding and predicting hurricanes. They not only had some very good station observations with barometers and anemometers to measure the winds, but they also had a good idea of how the physics worked in hurricanes. In fact, the Cubans had a better track record and well-deserved reputation for accuracy. That same year of 1898, as well as in 1899, Isaac Klein also spends time in Mexico, where he establishes weather stations for use in forecasting weather for the U.S. fleet that was fighting the Spanish fleet in the Caribbean and West Indies. In August of 1900, Willis Moore moves to silence the Cuban forecasters altogether. At the peak of hurricane season, he decrees that only weather information gathered by U.S. observers can be sent over public telegraph lines. This was widely protested by the Cuban meteorologists, however, as being not merely completely arrogant, but so indefensible because this was hurricane season. This was a time when most people needed to have the best and most accurate projections that people at the time could get. This would later, of course, prove to be a fatal mistake. Isaac Klein, but additionally, in addition to the rejection of the Cubans, Isaac Klein actually wrote an article in 1891 in the Galveston Daily News in which he gave his official meteorological opinion and said that the thought of a hurricane ever doing serious harm to Galveston was a crazy idea, and believed a seawall was not needed due to his belief that a strong hurricane would not strike the island. Many residents had called for a seawall to protect the city, as I mentioned earlier, but Klein's statement helped to prevent its construction. As a result, the seawall was not built, and development activities on the island actively increased its vulnerability to storms. Sand dunes along the shore were cut down to fill low areas in the city, removing what little barrier there was to the Gulf of Mexico. Excuse me. That same article published in the Galveston News years earlier claimed it would be impossible for any cyclone to create a sea wave which would materially injure the city. The continental shelf is very shallow, so we felt like the waters would spread out and not... Sorry, guys, give me 1 second here.
Right, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a wee rest now, right, and I'll quickly read the comment.
Yeah, go
and
right
that'll
ahead.
give you a rest to get your throat. So that baldy bastard who's joined us, that fucking... By the way, I told Nick, right, since you're reading one of his stories, to make it really easy for you. So he gave you the most easiest one for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, hi Dawn, hello everybody that's joined, hey Carol, hey Robert, but Robert says he was eating popcorn, he said, probably that, but yeah, so far I've really enjoyed the presentation. It's something different, it's definitely different. Definitely different. It is different to the show tonight because usually we talk about crime and things like that. So this is a wee difference, and I've actually really sat here and enjoyed myself actually listening. Poor Nick's got to do all the talking. By the more night, his voice will be.
Like I said, that's why I got water with me. And I just want to give a quick shout out. I know you did this already, Lois, but this person, Perul, I know who she is. She's actually from India. Who's watching this.
I'm so sorry I said Paul. Sorry, please forgive me.
No,
I'm dyslexic, so I find it to struggle with words. I'll say the wrong name. He loves talking. Don't you be kidding. I'm glad to be reading one of my hero stories, as long as it's in Scottish. All I can say to you is, it is in Scottish, it means fuck off. Fuck Oscar. Fuck off.
As long as it's in Scottish.
But I just quickly want to ask you, Nick, right?
Yeah.
Do you think the problem also was back in the day, they didn't have the proper systems that they have now? I'm not saying that they're any better from back then to now. Because
I honestly think because this was the early years of meteorology, they really, again, just like when you start up anything, in spite of your best efforts, even if you don't really have very much that you could do to really predict such storms like this, you just had you had the best what you could. And that's why they were saying in this case that the Cuban meteorologists seem to have a much better stronghold of predicting hurricanes compared to the United States. In my opinion, and I haven't even really researched it, I wouldn't even be the least bit surprised that Cuba was probably started getting involved in meteorology before the United States did, because as far as the actual National Weather Service that we have here in the United States, that began back in 1870. So we didn't really have much weather service prior to really tell what was going to happen prior to 1870. So I think honestly, Cuba might have been involved with it a little longer than the United States did.
Don's asking, did he not invent a dowsing rod that's thick?
Oh, Isaac Klein. No, he didn't. He wasn't the one who invented dowsing rods.
No. He's not a gentleman, Nicola. He likes to pretend he's a gentleman. But if I had to say something, I would say he's a stalker. He's a stalker. He won't leave Nicola.
Oh my God, Scott. Okay, I'm going to say right now what Scott just said. That's the first time I've ever heard him swear. I've actually seen him swear.
Was he? Oh my God, I'm shocked that Lucy's lucky minute for a film. I'm so very let down and dismayed. Perhaps it's because I'm baldy, but however, the hair is just a cut. Scientists have recently discovered that bald men are sexy as fuck. Right. Scott, there's Grizzly, and then there's you.
Yeah.
You ain't sexy. I don't know what the hell you've been drinking, but stay off the toilet duck.
Like the BBC in the 1980, a guy called Michael Fish said he was going to be a great day. The next day was the worst hurricane Britain has ever seen.
God.
Never heard of that. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Jamie. Right, so we're ready. I'm tucked in. Ready?
Yeah, we'll take breaks while we're doing this, because again, it's definitely a lot to go through. So we'll continue on. So like I said,
You tell them, Eric.
The continental shelf is very shallow, so we felt like the waters would spread out and not be able to bring up any big waves or a giant storm surge. He declared the city safe from hurricanes. Isaac clearly believed in his own predictions. He built a stately house just 3 blocks away from the beach and moves in shortly afterwards with his wife Cora May and 3 young daughters. His brother Joseph also moves in with them. Perched on stilts, the house rests above 2 feet above the highest water mark ever recorded in Galveston. The Klein brothers work together at the Galveston Weather Bureau office located downtown in the Levy building. Readings are made and recorded with the utmost precision. When foul weather is in Galveston's forecast, signal flags are hoisted over the Levy building's roof, which indicate the storm's type and direction. Tropical storms are not uncommon along the Gulf coast, and islanders take them in stride. A red and black flag on top of the Levy building usually means foul weather is on the way. 2 flags would indicate the approach of a hurricane, but that warning was hardly ever given. Now, this is where we kind of begin part 3, believe it or not. Sometime near the end of August 1900, a storm takes shape between Africa and the Caribbean and emerged into the Atlantic Ocean. However, this is not completely certain because of the limited observational methods available to contemporary meteorologists, with ship reports being the only reliable tool for observing hurricanes. The first formal sighting of the tropical storm occurred on August 27th, about 1,000 miles west of the Windward Islands, when a ship encountered an area of unsettled wet weather. Over the next couple days, the system moved west-northwestwards and is thought to have maintained its intensity as a weak tropical storm before it passed through the Leeward Islands and entered the Caribbean Sea on August 31st. By then, it has traveled due west and is about 200 miles south of Puerto Rico. On Saturday, September 1st, Father Lorenzo Gangoy, the director of the Belen College Observatory in Havana, Cuba, noted that the storm was in its formative stages, with only vague indications of a small tropical cyclone to the southwest of St. Croix. It continues its march, moving across the Dominican Republic and Haiti before changing course. And does anyone know that name? Antigua. I can't even say that one. I'm just
I can't
butchering
see
that.
it because the letters are so tiny.
I know it's a
Antigua?
little bit. I know Antigua. I guess that's what it is. I know it's small for you guys, but I can read it perfectly well.
I've heard of
So-
the name Antigua before, but I can't see it. It's like that. It's
I
like
know
a-
it's small. Antigua reported a severe thunderstorm passing over on August 30th with lower barometric pressures
Yep.
and 2.6 inches of rain on the
right.
island. In Puerto Rico, the storm produced winds up to 43 miles per hour at San Juan. In Jamaica, heavy rainfall from the storm caused all rivers to swell. Floodwaters severely damaged banana plantations and washed away miles of railroads. Damage estimates range into thousands of British pounds. Monday, September 3rd. The system made landfall on Cuba near Santiago de Cuba. For the next 2 days, torrential rains pummeled the island before it moved slowly west-northwestward across the island, including a peak 24-hour total of 12.58 inches to the city of Santiago de Cuba. The city experienced its worst weather since 1877. The southern end of the city was submerged with about 5 feet of water. Firefighters and police rescued and aided stranded residents. St. George, a German streamer, ran aground at Daiquiri, a telegraph from the mayor of Trinidad, who was asking for assistance from the U.S. occupation government, indicated that the storm destroyed all crops and left many people destitute. So you guys can already see, not very long after it developed, it's already gathering strength and becoming a pretty powerful storm. It then emerged into Straits of Florida as a tropical storm on September 5th. As the system emerged into the Straits of Florida, Gangoit observed a large persistent halo around the moon, while the sky turned deep red and cirrus clouds moved northwards. This indicated to him that the tropical storm had intensified and that the prevailing winds were moving the system towards the coast of Texas. However, the United States Weather Bureau disagreed with this forecast, as they expected the system to recurve and make landfall in Florida. An area of high pressure over the Florida Keys ultimately moved the system northwestward into the Gulf of Mexico, where favorable conditions such as warm sea surface temperatures allowed the storm to intensify into a hurricane. Tuesday, September 4th. 38-year-old Isaac Klein receives an advisory telegraph from the Washington Bureau about a tropical storm disturbance moving northward over Cuba. Isaac takes note, but is not alarmed. Additionally, neither this telegraph or any further updates mentioned the word hurricane. At this time, they discouraged the use of terms such as hurricane or tornado, believe it or not, to avoid panicking residents in the path of any storm event. And that was something that continued up until the 1950s. So even after this tragic event, this went on for a couple more decades until about 1950, when they finally lifted that ban from using the word hurricane or tornado. Wednesday, September 5th. Initially, as the storm moved across Cuba and into the extreme southeastern Gulf of Mexico, all of the indications by the American weather observers in Cuba were that the storm was going to move north, which would take it into Florida and ultimately up the East Coast. The typical path for what looks to them like an ordinary tropical storm, especially during this time of the year. As a result, the Central Office of the Weather Bureau issued a storm warning in Florida from Cedar Key to Miami on that day. Between the U.S. weather observers, there was nothing really to be concerned about the storm, and yet the Cubans, who had experience with many different kinds of hurricanes, knew that something was off. The Cubans are convinced that the storm will veer west toward the Gulf of Mexico. The Weather Bureau forecast had no way of knowing the storm's trajectory, but because Willis Moore has cut off their access to telegraph lines due to tensions in the aftermath of the Spanish-American War, their concerns never make it to the mainland. Moore also changed protocol to force local Weather Bureau offices to seek authorization from the central office before issuing storm warnings. It's a forecast Galveston never hears. An area of high pressure over the Florida Keys ultimately moved the system northwestward into the Gulf of Mexico, where favorable conditions such as warm sea surface temperatures allowed the storm to. Oh, wait a minute. This is already. I don't know why. That's the same information I had before. I must have accidentally copied it.
Double it.
News. Yeah. So
Don't worry about it.
yeah. News of the storm reaches Galveston, Texas that day, but it barely even makes the papers, and no one paid very much attention. The Klein brothers keep a close watch on their instrumentation, however. Isaac has seen the reports out of Cuba, but remains confident that no storm would harm the city. Thursday, September 6th. Hurricane warnings are issued for the coast of Louisiana and points east. Later that day, the warning is in effect along the coast from Cedar Key to Savannah, Georgia, while storm warnings were displaced from Charleston, South Carolina to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, as well as from Pensacola, Florida. Advisories are given as far north as Boston, Massachusetts. In the eastern Gulf of Mexico, the ship Louisiana encountered the hurricane, whose captain P.C. Halsey estimated that the system had wind speeds of 100 miles per hour. The hurricane continued to strengthen significantly while heading west-northwestward across the Gulf. Observers
What was his name?
T.P. Halsey or Isaac Klein?
Okay, yeah. Halsey.
Okay. Observers on the Mississippi and Louisiana coast report storm damage overnight. Cuban forecasters adamantly disagreed with the Weather Bureau, saying the hurricane would continue west. One Cuban forecaster predicted the hurricane would continue into central Texas near San Antonio. Isaac Klein monitored the cloud cover and winds, but there was nothing unusual about the day. Friday, September 7th. Sometime that night, the storm shifts west toward the Gulf of Mexico. Some of that same information again. It is because the storm now had officially shifted west toward the Gulf of Mexico, that is where track of the storm, they pretty much was lost. That's where they lost track of it, as it was far away from land and it was out in the open in water, and it was just completely unpredictable at this point. At the time, they knew of the storms. What they knew of the storms then was that they keep moving north, but their assumption was proven to be wrong. As it traveled through the Gulf of Mexico, which was already superheated from the especially hot summer, it basically acted as a heat engine with an inexhaustible supply of energy to draw upon. The wind speed builds as the storm feeds ravenously on the heat of the Gulf water. It keeps strengthening, and once it reaches winds up to 74 miles per hour, a hurricane is born. This giant storm was moving forward probably only about 10 miles an hour, which is usually the average speed for a typical hurricane, very slowly and significantly, because as it moves, building more power. Suddenly, this fairly routine tropical cyclone became a massive and destructive beast. The system reached its peak intensity with estimated sustained winds of up to 145 miles per hour, which made it equivalent to a Category 4 hurricane on the modern-day Saffir-Simpson scale. That day, the Weather Bureau realized that the storm was continuing west-northwestward across the Gulf of Mexico, rather than turning northward over Florida and the East Coast as it had predicted. In Galveston, the day begins with little indication that a destructive force is sweeping across the Gulf of Mexico toward the island. Isaac Klein remains unaware that a hurricane is heading their way. That morning, he stands on the city's Gulf shore and carefully surveys the sea. A strong wind was coming out of the northwest, and the tide was rising, which was an unusual circumstance, as it was driving water out of the bay. He knew the name for this, as this was called a storm tide. So, and that's typical with what you see with a lot of hurricanes and typhoons, is when you see these swells, which were little larger waves that came farther apart and pounded up on the beaches with a different sound than the standard waves. So you can kind of say this was very much like a precursor. Yeah, see, far in advance of hurricanes, these fairly large waves that come in long intervals, maybe a couple minutes between each, and are actually swells that are generated by the hurricane, and they move away in advance of the storm. So it acts as kind of like a precursor. When Isaac returns to the office, a new report has been received from headquarters in Washington, D.C. The tropical storm they thought was heading north has now veered west, and Galveston should brace for high winds and heavy rain. Isaac isn't worried, as he had written 9 years earlier that any storm could seriously damage Galveston in an absurd delusion. While the day is hot and humid, the barometer isn't showing any signs of falling, and wind speed remains stable. Somewhere out in the Gulf, ships are being lashed out by the hurricane, but Isaac has no way of knowing. There was no ship to shore at this point, so even if a ship encountered this hurricane, they had no way of getting word to shore. So Klein and the other weather stations are relying upon other land-based weather forecasting installations. Isaac Klein puts all of his faith in those limited tools. Like many of his era, he believes that the technology right in front of him is all that he needs. As the city swelters under a heat wave, Klein, however, raises a red and black flag on top of the Levy building, warning residents of an approaching storm. It was one of the hottest periods ever in Galveston's history. The humidity is almost unbearable. The waves lapping against Galveston shores are as warm as bath water. The beaches are filled with bathers, taking advantage of Galveston's Gulf side local playing in the surf, and the island's bathhouses provide a little relief. Among them are the children who live at the nearby St. Mary's Orphanage. The orphanage, founded in 1866, and also was the first children's hospital in the state, was a wonderful beachfront property which consisted of 2-story dormitories with big balconies overlooking the Gulf, and were right off the beach, just behind salt cedar trees and sand dunes. The location seemed ideal, as it was far from town and the threat of yellow fever, which was going on at that time. There were 93 children and 10 sisters. They watched as the waves crashed noisily into the Galveston shore. That evening, however, the winds turn calm and the bright moon shines down. The Klein brothers finish their work and return to their family. Isaac's wife, Cora May, is pregnant with their 4th child and retires early. By midnight, Isaac is asleep as well. A city sleeps, unaware that the hurricane out in the Gulf is becoming a monster and heading their way. Isaac's home, being only 3 blocks away from the beach, is close enough to feel the reverberations from the pounding sound. That night, he awakens to the persistent sense that something is not right, but as usual had no particular concern that anything was coming. He falls back to sleep, feeling safe and secure. At about 4 a.m. that morning, 30-year-old Joseph, however, wakes up and begins to feel very concerned and feared that death and destruction was close by. Joseph looks out a window and sees the backyard is under several inches of water. He knocks on Isaac's door and wakes his older brother, as Joseph has the sense of impending doom and believed that floodwaters were coming in and approaching the house. Together, they go to the beachfront and they saw these great waves breaking on the south shore. They also know that the winds were coming in strong from the north and the tide moving up towards the center of the city. Joseph believed that the worst was about to happen, but Isaac dismissed his concerns and said he will be the one who will determine whether or not to notify Washington, D.C. of anything unusual happening that day. Isaac assures his brother that they can check their instruments in the morning to see if Joseph's premonitions have have a basis.
Is that not amazing that somebody actually predicted that his own brother predicted that something more was going to happen?
Yeah,
And you
it's
think
very.
that... Sorry, on you go, my love.
No, I'm saying it's very like incredible. But yeah, go ahead. What you were going to say?
I was going to say it's amazing the amount of people when you talk about natural disasters, and this is why I love the fact we're doing natural disasters, because I love natural disasters. But it always takes me back to that 10-year-old in the 2004 tsunami
Yep,
who rescued people's lives.
that's correct. Yeah.
Obviously, she's a lot older than that now, but she was 10 years old at the time, and she'd been taught at school if water rushes out fast outward, that means that there's a tsunami on its way. That's amazing.
Right.
That's just amazing that
Definitely.
people have that power to actually predict.
It's amazing, but of course, as you're about to see in this case, things are about to get a hell of a lot worse. So, because, continue on for the next slide, unaware of the danger approaching them, the hurricane is relentlessly making its way towards the island. 120-foot swells ripple across the Gulf. Winds over 150 miles per hour scream westward along the open sea. Pressure plummets around its eye, and spiraling winds carry air at over 1 million tons per second. The key part of the storm is an area known as the eye wall. It's the intense band of convection that forms around the center of low pressure. The very high winds are concentrated around the core of thunderstorms in the middle of the hurricane. Along the eye wall, the winds begin to blow so fast they create a centrifugal force. They are literally lifting the surface of the sea, creating a huge circular formation that stretches up to 2 miles above the open water. The ocean rushes outward from the course of the storm, producing what is often the most dangerous, lethal, and often deadliest part of the hurricane, the storm surge. I mean, storm surges basically are the, like I said, are the deadliest part of the entire hurricane because they come into land so fast and they can rise up so high that this is something that you cannot run away from. I mean, that's almost like basically like, let's say, for example, if you had like a plate or something and you put some water on it, then you blow the water. I mean, then you blow on it. What usually happens? The water kind of spreads out. Same in the case for a hurricane when you have these very strong winds and when they start pushing outwards and when they eventually affect, basically structures or so, especially if people are not given that warning, people drown. That mass of water is now heading straight for Galveston, Texas, a city where the highest elevation is just only 8 feet above sea level. In 24 hours, Galveston will make history as the site of America's deadliest natural disaster. Okay, so this is kind of the next part, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break. So if you guys want to say anything, feel free to give your opinions and comments.
Jamie said I was on holiday in the US and we were into a hurricane. So that's interesting. Scott's just been an arsehole, Scott usually is. But no, Nick, I've really found this really interesting tonight. It's really been an interesting one, a very interesting one. They always say, right, people think that tornadoes are the most deadliest. I wouldn't say tornadoes were. I wouldn't even say, like volcanoes. Yeah, they can kill people. Yeah, they can do the amount of damage. But see, if you look at it in hindsight, the most deadliest thing to fight against, and you've got absolutely zero zilch chance of outrunning, is water based.
Yeah.
There's no way you can outrun water. And if I'm really honest with you guys, I don't think that seriously that they've got a proper, sorry, my thing we keeps tilting. They've not got a proper warning system, because they haven't found the rhythm or the speed that water goes to warn many people about. It's easy enough to warn people about tornadoes. You've got sirens. Earthquake, you've got sirens. You know, water-based like tsunamis, hurricanes, no one's got much time to react. If you hear a siren for a tornado, everybody's first protocols are basement, hide somewhere, thing with. But I don't feel that they've got enough for when it's water-based. But the problem with water-based is it comes so fast that you've got no chance. I mean, look at how many like when you're talking about this one, look at the one of the tsunamis, and it always sticks out in my head. And I know it was back in either the 18 or the 1900s, and it was a town, and it was no just like this one that you're speaking about tonight, but it's not this one, if that makes sense. And they were all sleeping at night, and nobody knew the tsunami had came until it hit. That's what you're up against when you're water based.
It's in the order sometimes, like when it comes to tsunamis, or in this case storm surges, it's in the order of these waves going at 100, 200 miles an hour. So you're not going to
been given warnings like recently in the past few years. They do give warnings so that you can evacuate,
especially after an earthquake or so. But when you decided to stay, I mean, again, these waves come in so fast, again, 100, 200 miles an hour. So that means you're not going to be able to run away on foot.
Oh God, no. And I think even with technology in some of the cars, I don't even think cars can outrun tsunamis.
No, they can't. They can go as high as 500 miles an hour.
It's really, really sad, because you think if there was a system that could detect, and this is how my wee brain works, by the way, but I think sometimes, would it no better if you're wanting a warning system for a tsunami, is to have it under the water? So when it bypasses, then it sets off some sort of alarm, then it's transmitted. That's just how my wee brain works.
That's a
I
good
think
idea.
there are some systems like that in place. But that doesn't mean that if it's coming from another direction, I don't know how far their span of detection is. Like, say, if it's coming from, he's explaining how this one moved from here from another country to the Gulf of Mexico. So, say, like, you're not going to know if it's in the middle of the night and you're asleep. Yeah, the weatherman might be saying something about it, but back then he wouldn't have been, because they didn't have, like social media and television like they do now. But like if it's going to come from another country and it's going to come through whatever direction that you can't really predict most of the time, and then back to the Gulf of Mexico and then back into Galveston, like you'd have to be able to track it through all of those different places. And it's kind of like, I think that they have lots of like cables and stuff, and it's like underneath the ocean. In some places they have cables laid and stuff like that. I don't know exactly what they're for, because like in the Navy you have to like know where the locations of these cables are and stuff like that, because you also have sonar and stuff like that. But like I think some of those are actually put there on purpose to detect stuff like that, if it's a hot area for where like the potential for hurricanes and stuff like that is. I think there actually is some stuff in place underneath the ocean. I don't know about every place, but like some places there are, and I don't know how accurate it is if it's coming from another country and it's gonna like, plow through whatever other undetectable path and then back over here to the Gulf of Mexico where, like where we're at. But like I was gonna say a while ago, but I kind of wanted to wait. I was actually at the Galveston seawall a month ago.
You were
in there? Yeah, I went to see the seawall when I was there. And when you're standing up where the seawall's at, where everyone takes pictures and stuff, you can actually look out into the ocean and you can actually see, I would say probably about, I don't know how many feet, I want to say half of a mile off of the edge there of the seawall. You can see about half of a mile out. It depends on what direction you're looking. Yeah. But you can see where the water changes from being that murky, muddy brown to like being like a bluey color. You can like literally see where it like changes, like it flashes together and it changes. It's kind of weird.
That's incredible.
Grizzly, you're awful quiet. Come on.
I'm just listening and soaking it all in.
I actually fell asleep for like 2 seconds. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh,
But you had my face covered up, so you couldn't tell. And I was
no
like,
big deal.
Gonna notice.
Well, and things are actually going to be getting a lot more intense from this point on. So, because like I said, I think it's probably best at this point we continue on towards the main events. So, you guys ready?
Yeah.
I'm ready.
All right. So here we go. Saturday, September 8th, 1900. The weather brings stronger winds, bigger waves, and rain. The anemometer at Klein's office registers sustained winds of 80 miles per hour by late afternoon. Within an hour, the wind speed was 100 miles per hour and climbing. Isaac returns to the beach and once again observes the high, slow swells. He clearly knows that this was unusual behavior for the Gulf of Mexico and was not at all certain what it indicated, and indeed failed to recognize that the swells were an indication of tremendous energy being brought forward from a large storm. Isaac returns to his downtown office and notices the barometric pressure dropped only slightly since the night before. Residents wake up to a Saturday morning newspaper that the hurricane will change its course or spend its force before reaching Texas. Official forecasts issued from the Weather Bureau Washington headquarters are based on observations transmitted from local offices. Watching the sea creep inexorably inward from the beach, flooding block after block, Isaac Klein recognized the disaster that was about to befall the city. At 2:30 p.m., he dispatched his brother Joseph, who was also his assistant, with a message for Weather Bureau headquarters in Washington. It reported that half the city was underwater, and Joseph remarked later that he had realized the full extent of the situation at the time he sent it. He could have amended it to entire city now underwater. Joseph waded through waist-deep water and floating debris to the telegraph office, only to be told that the lines had been dead for hours. One phone line connected line to the mainland still functioned, however, and the intervention of a friend who worked at the local telephone company moved Joseph's call ahead of 4,000 others waiting to be connected by the Galveston operator. His enciphered message to Washington reached the Western Union Telegraph Office in Houston just before the telephone line too went dead. It read in part, "A great calamity is upon us." On Saturday morning, the swells persisted despite only partly cloudy skies, largely because of the unremarkable weather. Few residents saw cause for concern. As a result, residents were expecting a rainy, windy afternoon at worst, but continued going about their business. After 8 a.m., heavy rain begins to fall on the island. People celebrate the end of the summer and heat wave that plagued them for days as well. Few people evacuated across Galveston's bridges to the mainland, and the majority of the population was unconcerned by the rain clouds that began rolling in by mid-morning. Yeah, this is an actual photo of when the floodwaters actually began rising in the city of Galveston.
Holy shit.
Completely unaware of the danger ahead of them. As the tides began to shift inland, several inches of water began running up and began pouring in the center of town in low-lying streets. Actually, the other thing, too, if that wasn't enough, before I get to that, that morning, Isaac tells several people that while there will be a storm that day, he expects only minor flooding. Oh, and also, this is what I was going to say. Actually, from the reports that I've read about the early events, there were actually several children that were playing out in the flooded streets. So what I'm actually about to do next is actually show you an example of one of these kids that was among one of the kids that played out on these roads. It's a survivor account. This is an actual clip from that documentary, When Weather Changed History, and they've interviewed a Galveston historian who was also the granddaughter of a survivor. This clip is going to be relatively short. Hopefully you guys can hear it. So here it is.
No, Nick, it's not playing.
You can't hear it?
No.
Uh-oh, hang on one second. Let me because I will need the sound for this. Give me 1 second here.
Sorry, Eric. Got it.
Okay, I got another idea. Hang on. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to have to exit out of this for a second, and then I'm going to put it back because I know another way of how you can get sound. So bear with me for just a second.
There's no any comments, so...
Yeah, why don't you if you can take care of the comments, that would be great.
Eric says no sound. It's okay. We're on top of it, Honeybee. We're on top of it. Now, remember, guys, tune in for part 2 tomorrow for this interesting one. If you haven't seen part 1 tonight, definitely watch it and catch up.
All right. Well, let's try. Jeez, where is it?
Eric was turning the toilet into a time machine. If that works, I'm coming to sit in it.
That's weird. It worked last time I was using it. Oh, share system. Oh, wait, share. Oh, I know that doesn't work on the. Oh, wait a minute. No, maybe I could try this. I don't know how this is gonna work. It says share system audio and entire screen, so I'm gonna try this. All right, now let's see if can you guys see the screen now? I mean, can you guys see it? All right, so the audio should work. Let me know if you guys can hear it.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay, there we go. All right, so listen carefully. It's a pretty important story you're about to hear.
My grandfather was 6 years old at the time of the storm, and he tells me that morning he was out playing. And he said it was a lot of fun because the streets were then flooded, and they could take sticks, and they would put the sticks, which they considered to be big ships, and race them down the street. They would look at the beautiful waves crashing, and they'd go, wow, that's awesome.
So it's just, like I said, it's just a short clip. The lighthearted atmosphere, however, is short-lived as they watch the waves getting higher and higher and pushing further inland. At the beach, residents watch as the surf pounds the bathhouses and breaks them apart. People then began to realize a serious disaster was unfolding right in front of them. Sister Elizabeth Ryan, one of 10 sisters at St. Mary's Orphanage, had come into town that morning to collect food. Despite pleas from Mother Gabriel, the assistant superior at St. Mary's Infirmary, for her to stay at the hospital until the storm passed, Sister Elizabeth said she had to return to the orphanage. Sister Elizabeth said that she had the provisions in the wagon, and if she did not return, the children would have no supper. She didn't know that whether she returned or not, there would be no more suppers at the orphanage. At St. Mary's Orphanage, high waves eat away at the sand dunes, which acted as a natural barrier between the Gulf and the orphanage. I mean, the sisters and children that happened to be outside and watched as they watched these sand dunes disappear, like they were made of flour. With the waters of the Gulf getting closer to the dormitories, the sisters then took all of the children to the girls' dormitory because it was the newer, sturdier, and stronger of the two. Just after 10 a.m., the Galveston Weather Bureau gets a telegram from Washington, D.C., predicting that the wind direction will change from northwest to northeast. Joseph Klein replies with a quick response, reporting heavy rain, thunderstorm activity, and a falling barometer. He then returns to the roof of the Levy building and discovers that the rain gouge has blown away. Winds are at an estimated 42 miles per hour, and the barometer has fallen slightly. The streets of Galveston have been flooded into angry rivers, with each wave rolling up underneath the houses and beginning to wear away the foundations. In the first floor chapel at St. Mary's Orphanage, the sisters huddled inside with the 93 children. Realizing that they were under threat, the sisters gathered the terrified children in the chapel and had them sing the song Queen of the Waves repeatedly as an attempt to calm them down. It was an old, which if you guys don't know, it was an old French hymn that was sung by sailors during bad storms, seeking the protection of Mary.
Grizzly.
What's that?
Love you. Grizzly's away because he's got another show.
Oh, that's right. He's got other show. Yeah. So if you guys didn't know, it was an old French hymn that was sung by sailors during bad storms, seeking the protection of Mary, Mother of Jesus. They sing while the sisters pray. The waters, however, kept rising, and eventually the Gulf waters approached the front steps of that dormitory. Now, I got another video here. Normally, I don't really make these kind of videos. I'm actually going to play the song Queen of the Waves, which is probably the most notorious version of it because they actually use this for the documentaries that they've made about the Galveston hurricane. It's just a 2-minute long song. And this slideshow, as a matter of fact, I actually made this. So this is my own work that I put together, and it involves the orphanage during the hurricane while this song plays. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it. It's kind of I don't even know really how to describe it, really, but here it is.
Queen of the waves, look forth across the ocean, from north to south, from east to stormy west. See how the waters with tumultuous motion rise up and flow, without a pause or rest. But fear we not, the storm clouds round us gather. Thou art our mother, and thy little child is thee, O merciful, our loving brother, God of the sea and of the tempest wild. Help then, sweet Queen, in our exceeding danger, by thy 7 griefs, in pity, Lady, save. Think of the babe that slept within the manger, and help us now, dear Lady of the Wave. Up to thy shrine we look and see the glimmer, thy votive lamp sheds down on us the far light of our eyes. Oh, let it ne'er grow dimmer, till in the sky we hail the morning star. Then joyful hearts shall kneel around thine altar, and grateful songs re-echo down the nave. Never our faith in thy sweet power can falter, Mother of God, Our Lady of the Wave.
That song is normally sang every September 8th, so I can guarantee you that it's probably going to be sung tomorrow for people that are like involved in the anniversary. So obviously, I've given my part for it, even though we're just a day early.
Sorry, Nick, my internet dropped out, honey.
Oh, really?
Because I tried to go into the comments and it wouldn't let me. Hey,
That's
Sarah
fine.
Louise. Hey, Holly. Hey, Eric. I'm still here, Eric, and that ball bag's still there.
So, okay, just wanted to make sure because that kind of freaked me out for a little bit. I thought, that the connection somehow went out.
No, it's just my internet. See if Scott would pay the bills, then I would be able to use my internet, alright.
Wow. So, years of shaving off the top of sandhills and dunes to fill low spots for building and expand beaches had flattened the island's profile. By mid-afternoon, hurricane-force winds are tearing across Galveston and rapidly disappearing underwater. Monster waves hammer the coast. It is a telltale sign the hurricane has arrived. Many residents out in the street are swept off their feet by the rushing floodwaters, such as in this artist's impression. Residents, realizing the danger of what was happening, began fleeing in panic. By 12:30 p.m., the streetcars are unable to move and the water is rising higher. At this point, it was no longer an island. It was simply now part of the ocean floor. At 2:30 p.m. from the weather station at the Levy building, Isaac Klein can see the water rising from the streets downtown. By then, Isaac Klein realized that something extraordinarily wrong was in fact occurring. He then instructs his brother Joseph with a message for Weather Bureau headquarters in Washington, D.C. Isaac raises the hurricane flag, but by then, it was already too late. It's reported that half the city was underwater. Oh, wait, it's the same thing. Again, I'll skip that one. That's weird. Why is it saying the same stuff again?
Listen, don't worry. You're doing really, really well. Love to you as well, Drew. Hope you're well, sweetheart. Keep your chin up. Pay the bills. How do you do that, Scott? If you put your hand in your pocket and get that money out, that's how you do it, son.
So, understandably, I mean, as you guys could pretty much imagine, no planned evacuations were made, and the train trestles and wagon bridge were washed out. So this was probably your worst nightmare. I mean, everyone's worst nightmare to deal with, because they're cut off from communication. People were trapped. They didn't know what to do. They had no means of escape. Communication's been cut off. So essentially, at this point, you are completely alone from the outside world. So there was now nowhere to escape. John Blagden, a weather observer at the Galveston Bureau, who at 5:15 p.m., he goes to the Levy building room to take the latest measurements. Oh, whoops, there was another one right above that. Excuse me. Water rose steadily from 3 p.m. until approximately 7:30 p.m. When he looked at the instruments, he found that the winds were so strong that they had ripped all of the instruments used for measuring velocity from the top of the building. Blagden stays at the weather office while Isaac goes to care for his family. Just how great a calamity was becoming all too apparent by the time Isaac, wading more than walking, made his way to his home. Water in the streets was waist deep and rising steadily. The timbers that had formed the city's wooden sidewalks floated atop the water like a crust, and winds in excess of 80 miles per hour hurled timbers through the air. When Isaac reached home, he is greeted by his wife, his 3 daughters, and finds dozens of people and their families, approximately 50 people, already sheltering there, neighbors and strangers who, like the Kleins, saw it as a place of safety. The water was soon 9 feet deep, engulfing the first floor, and the group abandoned it for the second, but the house remained secure against the storm. Little did Isaac or anyone know that his house will prove to be one of the worst places in the city to try and ride out the storm. At 5:30 p.m., Isaac's brother Joseph arrives home. He tells Isaac that the storm is gaining strength and believes that staying this close to the coast will mean certain death for everyone. He tries to convince Isaac and everyone that their best chance for survival is to take cover in the center of town towards higher ground, but Isaac declared the safety of the house preferable to the rising waters and flying debris outside which led to an argument between the brothers. 6:15 p.m. As the two men argue, the winds of the hurricane shift direction. They are now coming from the west. It's a telltale sign now that the eye wall, the worst and most destructive part of the storm, has officially arrived. And I think I think that's when I think a lot of people started realizing, to their complete horror, that they were like, oh my God, you know what we went through earlier today, that wasn't the worst. This is the worst in this case. 6:30 p.m. Isaac stands at his door as 120-mile-per-hour winds shriek past his house. Then, at 7:30 p.m., Isaac watches in horror as the water outside the house rises 4 feet in just 4 seconds. Imagine,
Oh my God.
imagine just looking out and just seeing the water rising again. I think that pretty much told you that they were now officially in a worse, horrific nightmare, that there was nowhere to escape. They were trapped at this point. The barometer plummets, indicating foul weather ahead. The hurricane brought with it a storm surge of over 15 feet that washed over the entire island. An additional 5 feet of water had flowed into portions of the city by 8:30 p.m. The cyclone dropped 9 inches of precipitation in Galveston on September 8th, setting a record for the most rainfall for any 24-hour period in the month of September in the city's history. Now, I have another video here. This is now actual survivor accounts that are read. Again, it's short-lived, but these are actually the accounts that I'm about to play.
The Gulf looked like a great gray wall about 50 feet high and moving slowly toward the island. My
grandmother and aunts and uncles, their houses was just in splinters. The storm, the 1900 storm, just took every trace away.
Sorry for the picture quality, but that's as best as I could really clear it. In the Levy building, John Blagden logs a reading of 28.4 inches lower than anything the Weather Bureau has seen on land. As the floodwaters surged into St. Mary's Orphanage and collapse of the building appeared imminent, the sisters rushed to the children to the second floor of the dormitory. Suddenly, a giant wave crashed into the boys' dormitory, where it collapsed and was carried away by the floodwaters, which increased the fear of the children, which they began to scream. While the sisters attempted to calm them down, they have them sing Queen of the Waves again repeatedly. The sisters had Henry Esquire, a worker, collect clothesline rope. Again, they had the boys and girls. Okay, that seems, might have to fix something up there. But one witness later said that the children were very frightened and the sisters were very brave. The sisters then took the clothesline, cut it into sections, and each sister tied to her own body between 6 and 8 children to the cinctures which they wore around their waists in an attempt to save these children by keeping them together. It was a valiant yet sacrificial effort to save the children. Some of the older children climbed onto the roof of the orphanage. The waters filled the first floor, and eventually the dormitory building that had been the sanctuary for the children and sisters was lifted from its foundation, floated briefly, collapsed with the bottom falling out, and the roof came crashing down, trapping the sisters and the children as it sank.
Oh my God.
I think I read a placard about this. This happened in Galveston.
Yes, there is a plaque about that.
Yeah, I read
that
a placard
orphanage.
about the lady, and one of the ladies didn't survive, and all the children that were tied to her perished with her.
Yeah. Now, additionally, it's probably should be a word of note. There are no photographs of the hurricane in progress. All that's left are artist interpretations of Galveston being swallowed alive. And this is this is a full artist impression of the 1900 storm. The survivors are trying to cling on whatever they can to try to survive this entire storm.
Holy God. Again, this just proves how much damage water can actually do.
Yes, definitely. I got another video here. This is another survivor account. Survivor accounts collection.
My mother could describe the weather like millions of demons overhead. Then she had to get out with
Sounded like a freight train passing over the roof of the house. Water.
She realized that the house was going to pieces around us. We were just waiting for the part we were in to go to pieces.
So continuing onwards, floodwaters and winds up to 120 miles per hour tear the city apart, brick by brick, piece by piece. When the houses went down, people then got tangled into the debris and drowned. Few streets in the city escaped wind damage, and all streets suffered water damage, with much of the destruction caused by storm surge. All bridges connecting the island to the mainland were washed away, while approximately 15 miles of railroad track was destroyed. Winds and storm surge also downed electrical, telegraph, and telephone wires. The storm surge swept buildings off their foundations and dismantled them. Many buildings and homes destroyed, other structures after being pushed into the storm by the waves, which even demolished structures built to withstand hurricanes.
That is so true, Nettie.
Now, I got another video here. This is actually, again, from When Weather Changed History. And I'm trying to remember which one this... Oh, this was, I think, another descendant who was talking about her grandfather, I believe.
My grandfather found something to act as a raft. He put his wife and his 5 children on the raft, but there wasn't room for him. So he grabbed the first thing he could grab, which was a piano. And he watched as some of the family were washed overboard and could not do anything to help them.
And then I think I got a second video. This is more of the accounts.
My mother, when she realized that the water was going to come in the house, she went out, got an axe. She chopped holes. Water would come up into the house, held the house on the ground.
The house
just
collapsed. We were underwater. I never moved. We just sat there and drifted. We had left it.
Remember that we were all frightened. My sister and I were the only 2 children. The water kept coming up higher during the storm.
Oh, now this right here, I believe, was I'm trying to remember which one this was. Yeah, there was a couple videos that I had in between. I think this might be the last one. Last one for now. I got a few more after this.
No one even faintly suspected the disastrous tidal wave that was so swiftly moving in from the depths of the Gulf.
Yeah, I guess it was just like a real short account for some reason. Inside their home, Isaac and Joseph watch a sickening collection of debris floating by. His house, though still standing, is rapidly filling with water. 3 blocks from Isaac's house, the storm is tearing at the massive steel girders of the streetcar railroad trestle, more than 1,000 feet long. Now, you have to, right before I tell you what happens next, when they saw the sickening collection of debris, I mean, it was everything that you can imagine. It was like fences, it was the remains of houses, it was animals, it was vehicles, horse carts, there was people. I mean, just anything you can imagine was in this collection of debris. So, like I said, now we got a railroad car that is more than 1,000 feet long. It's then suddenly the trestle breaks free and begins spinning and turning, heading in their direction. I mean, this thing was just thrown from where it was, and it was just like swinging back and forth like a giant scythe, just cutting right towards the Klein house. Isaac can see this out his window, and he realized that this may very well be the end. His brother Joseph grabs 2 of Isaac's children, 12-year-old Allie Mae and 11-year-old Rosemary, and jumps through a window. The trestle smashes into the Klein family home, knocking it off its foundation. The house floats a little way, then it tilted, and it sank. Isaac holds on to his pregnant wife, Cora May, but they are quickly separated, and Isaac watched as Cora May becomes tangled and trapped in the debris that had moments earlier been their home, taken under as the house sinks. Isaac is then thrown underwater as he is crushed under debris and began to nearly drown. Then somehow he is freed, most likely by some motion in the water, and finds himself on the surface. In the lightning flash, he sees his third and youngest daughter, 6-year-old Esther Bell, and begin to ride on a raft of debris. Hundreds of people are thrown from their homes into the dark, raging water. Other residents climb to the second stories, attics, and even roofs of their homes, which was still a deadly trap as flying debris struck many who dared venture outside their homes. So they even suffered a far more brutal death. I mean, just imagine basically, that no matter where you were, there was no safe
It
place.
sounds like they were inside of a washer while it's spinning.
Yeah, very much.
Oh, God,
Now, if you guys, the first video that I showed, which was of that historian Linda McDonald talking about her grandfather. Now I got another video here where she talks about her grandfather's ordeal, what they did actually.
Other neighbors tried desperately to save themselves and their homes. Linda McDonald's family chops through their floor with axes. Her grandfather was just 6 years old at the time.
He figured they were going to die. He said this had to be madness, chopping through to get to the water. They chopped through and the water came up, and it settled down the house.
Years later, her grandfather told Linda about the awful sounds that night and how the houses seemed to cry.
And I said, Grandpa, you're pulling my leg. I said, I know, because houses don't cry. And he said, that night, everything cried.
Wow. Do you know, I never ever thought, I thought if you chop wood on water, that it would sink it quicker. So there's an idea.
Yeah. This is, I think I got only less than 2 or 3 more of these survivor accounts. So here's another one.
Our first realization something bad was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We noticed lumber floating by. We could hear the cows mooing, dogs barking, the shouting, one thing or another. At about 4:30,
all of a sudden, my sister screamed and pointed into the door into the room next door, and that wall was leaving that ceiling. It was going out each time a gust of wind would come.
A river of debris rolls across the island. The Tremont Hotel, where hundreds of people sought refuge during the storm, was severely damaged. All public buildings also suffered damage, including City Hall, which was completely de-roofed, a hospital, a city gas works, a city waterworks, and the Custom House. The Grand Opera House also sustained extensive damage. 3 schools and St. Mary's University were nearly destroyed. Many places of worship in the city also received severe damage or were completely demolished. Of the 39 churches in Galveston, 25 experienced complete destruction, while the others received some degree of damage. The island of Galveston is now completely underwater, and the storm surge isn't the only killer. Many of the roofs throughout the city are covered with slate and sharp tiles, which are now being thrown aloft by gusts, now up to 140 miles per hour. Houses along the beachfront were lifted from their foundations and sent like battering rams into other houses. At St. Mary's Infirmary, the floodwaters filled the first floor. From the second-story balcony, the sisters pulled refugees in as they floated by and brought them into the overcrowded hospital. They had no food or water, however. Almost every window in the facility was broken out, sending the wind and rain whipping through the building. While the main hospital building was still standing, the adjacent structures had been destroyed. At places, the wall of debris was 2 stories tall. Unbelievable. Inside this great wall were destroyed houses, pieces of furniture, pots, pans, cats, dogs, and people. Those who were dead and those who were dying. Just, can you guys also imagine just the sounds that were occurring during this? I mean, the screams were just, it had to have been horrific because you had children screaming for their mothers, women crying out for help, men begging for mercy from God. And then all of a sudden, those sounds would just cease. That tells you immediately someone's life had ended. It was over for them. However, in this case with the Klein brothers, Joseph Klein manages to climb onto the raft with 2 of Isaac's 3 children. In another lightning flash, Isaac could then see his brother and managed to reach each other onto the raft of debris and the howling winds with sounds of mayhem all around them as buildings being destroyed and shrieking of people. But Isaac's wife, Cora May, is nowhere to be seen. Years later, Joseph would write about that awful day. I got another video here. Now, this one I think you guys will find really interesting. This is now a descendant of the Klein brothers.
Joseph's grandson Jerry reads the memoir, telling of how, during Joseph's darkest hour, he sees something almost too good to be true.
My heart suddenly leaped with uncontrollable joy. In 2 figures that clung to the drift, I discovered my brother and his youngest child. In some miraculous manner, they had escaped alive from the house of doom. Only the mother, one of the dearest of women, was gone.
Oh my God, that's so sad.
The destructive wave makes its way from the Gulf side of the island towards the center of town. As it gathers its deadly cargo, the wall grows bigger, stronger, and heavier. Eventually, it created the one thing Galveston desperately needed but did not have. So right here from what I'm showing, there's just so much debris and water accumulating that it basically created this breakwater, which I'm pointing out now, which actually protected the interior of Galveston and the regional areas from the worst effect of the storm. So the central area received less damage than the initial rest of the island. So, it says so much debris had accumulated along a certain line of the city that it created a breakwater protecting the interior of Galveston, the region of partial destruction for the worst effects of the storm. Finally, after 12 hours of merciless assault, the winds died down. Before dawn, waters that had risen as high as 15 feet below sea level begins to recede. Now, I'm going to probably end this in a little bit, honestly, because I think this would be good for the part 2 section. But where I'm going to
I'll tell you what. Why don't we end it here if we were going on to part 2 and we can save that for tomorrow?
What I was going to do, this should only last just for a few more minutes, if you don't mind, because what I was
it's fine, honey, absolutely fine.
So what I'm actually going to cover very quickly is when you see a lot of documentaries, about the Galveston hurricane, most of the time they usually end it and they focus right on the destruction. They never really follow through with whatever happened with the rest of the storm's path. Fortunately for me, I've been able to receive that information, and it's going to be kind of surprising, shocking, if not, with what you guys are about to hear. So if I could just take another 10 minutes or so, I should be. We'll just follow the rest of the storm's path, and then we'll get to the damage and aftermath tomorrow. So here's what happened after it eventually left Galveston. After moving northward from Texas into Oklahoma territory, the storm produced winds of near 30 miles per hour at Oklahoma City. The extratropical remnants of the cyclone then re-intensified into the equivalence of a tropical storm and continued to strengthen, bringing strong winds to the Midwestern United States. So this is also information that most people have never heard of before involving this hurricane. High winds in Missouri toppled a brick wall under construction in St. Joseph, killing a man and severely injuring another. And get this, I never even knew about this. In Illinois, particularly hard hit was the city of Chicago, which experienced wind gusts up to 84 miles per hour. Thousands of dollars in damage occurred to roofs, trees, signs, and windows. Several people were injured, and 2 deaths occurred in the city, one from a live wire, and the other was a drowning after a boat capsized in Lake Michigan. In Wisconsin, a bateau with 18 people on board sank in the Eau Claire River, drowning 6 men and nearly taking the lives of the others. Heavy rains fell in parts of Minnesota. The Minneapolis-St. Paul area recorded 4.23 inches of precipitation over a period of 16 hours. Farther north, several washouts occurred, especially in the northern areas of the state. A bridge along with a few train cars were swept away during a washout in Cold Spring. In Michigan, the storm produced winds around 60 miles per hour at Muskegon. Tides from Lake Michigan were the highest in several months. According to the Times-Herald, the city of Marshall experienced the severest windstorm of the season, which uprooted trees and damaged several buildings. Throughout the state, winds left at least $12,000 in losses. The peach orchards, with many peach orchards, with many peach trees uprooted. Significant losses to apples and pears also occurred. Rough seas in Lake Erie resulted in several maritime incidents offshore Ohio. The John B. Lyon, a 255-foot steamer, capsized about 5 miles north of Conneaut. I guess that's how you say that one. 14 out of 16 crew members drowned. A survivor suggests that the ship being overloaded may have been a factor in its sinking. About 10 miles farther north, the schooner Dundee sank, causing at least 1 death. In another
Linda's asking, Nick, what was the hurricane rating of this storm? Hi, Linda.
It was a Category 4.
Oh.
In another incident nearby, the steamer City of Erie, with about 300 passengers on board, was hit by a wave that swept over the bulwarks. The engine slowed, and the steamers later reached safety in Canada with no loss of lives. In Toledo, strong winds disrupted telegraph services. Winds also blew water out of parts of the Maumee River and Maumee Bay to such an extent that they were impassable by vessels due to low water levels. A number of vessels were buried in mud several feet deep, while about 20 others were beached. Of the many cities in New York affected by the remnants of the hurricane, Buffalo was the hardest hit. There, winds peaked at 78 miles per hour, downing hundreds of electrical telegraph and telephone wires, while numerous trees toppled and some branches fell onto roadways. An oil derrick blew away and landed on the roof of a house, crushing the roof and nearly killing the occupants. A newly built ironworks building was virtually destroyed, causing a loss of about $10,000. At the Pan American Exposition, the storm damaged several structures, including part of the government building, while 2 towers were destroyed. Losses at the exposition alone were conservatively estimated at $75,000. And this is a rare photograph I was able to find of the damage in New York. It's rare to find images of the remnants of this hurricane outside of the Galveston hurricane. I mean, outside when the storm hit Galveston. 1 death occurred in Buffalo after a woman inadvertently touched a downed electrical wire, obscured by debris. Several nearby resorts received extensive damage. At Woodlawn Beach, several dozens of small boats and a pier were destroyed. Nearly all vessels owned by the Buffalo Canoe Club suffered severe damage or destruction at Crystal Beach. A toboggan slide and a restaurant were also destroyed. Losses in Crystal Beach reached about $5,000. Heavy crop losses occurred over western New York, with fallen apples and peaches completely covering the ground at thousands of acres of orchards. Losses reportedly ranged in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The rapidly moving storm was still exhibiting winds of 65 miles per hour while passing well north of New York City on September 12th. The New York Times reported that pedestrian walking became difficult and attributed one death to the storm. A sign pole snapped by the wind landed on a 23-year-old man, crushing his skull and killing him instantly, while two others were knocked unconscious. Awnings and signs on many buildings broke, and the canvas roofing at the fire department headquarters was blown off. Closer to the waterfront along the Battery seawall, waves and tides were reported to be some of the highest in recent memory of the fishermen and sailors. Spray and debris were thrown over the wall, making walking along the waterfront dangerous. Small craft in New York Harbor were thrown off course, and tides and currents in the Hudson River made navigation difficult. In Brooklyn, the New York Times reported that trees were uprooted and similar structures were blown down, and yaks were torn from moorings, with some suffering severe damage. Because of the direction of the wind, Coney Island escaped the fury of the storm, though a bathing pavilion at Bath Beach suffered damage from wind and waves. In Connecticut, winds gusted up to about 40 miles per hour. The apple crops, already endangered by drought conditions, suffered severe damage, with the Boston Globe noting that there was hardly an apple left on a tree in the entire state. In the town of Orange, 12 large tents at a fair were ripped. At another fair in New Milford, 15 tents collapsed, forcing closure of the fair. Along the coast, the storm produced abnormally high tides, with tides reaching their highest height in 6 years at Westbrook. Water reached the bulkheads and remained there for several hours. In Rhode Island, the storm left damage in the vicinity of Providence. Telegraph and telephone services were interrupted, but not to such a large extent. Some crafts in Narragansett Bay received damage, while apple orchards experienced slight losses. Lightning produced by the storm ignited several brush fires in Massachusetts, particularly in the southeastern portions of the state, with winds spreading the flames. In Plymouth and other nearby towns, some residents evacuated from the fires by boat. Most cottages around the Big Long, Gallows, Halfway, and Little Long ponds were reduced to burning coals. In Everett, orchards in the Woodlawn section suffered complete losses of fruit. 2 wooden frame buildings were demolished, while winds were toppled fences throughout the city. Winds damaged many telephone and electric wires in Cambridge. A lineman sent to fix the electrical wires nearly died when a pole snapped during a fierce wind gust. Orchards in the city suffered near complete loss, and many shade trees were also damaged. At least a few chimneys toppled, and several others were left leaning. A bathhouse at Harvard University lost a portion of its tin roof and its copper cornices. At Cape Cod, a wind speed of 45 miles per hour was observed at Highland Light in North Truro. Truro, I guess that's how you say it. Waves breached the sand dunes at multiple locations along the Cape, with water sweeping across a county road at Beach Point, North Truro. A number of fishing boats sank, and several fish houses received severe damage. One man drowned in a lake near Andover while canoeing during the storm. Strong winds in Vermont generated rough seas in Lake Champlain. Early reports indicated that a schooner sunk near Adams Ferry with no survivors, but the vessel was later found safely anchored at Westport, New York. According to a man near the lake, all water from the New York portion of the lake was blown to the Vermont side, crashing ashore in waves as high as 15 to 20 feet. In the state capital of Montpelier, several large trees at the State House were uprooted. Within Montpelier, I guess that's how I'm supposed to say that, and Montpelier, thank you. And vicinity, farmers suffered some losses to apples and corn. Telephone and telegraph services were almost completely cut off. And in Vergennes, I don't even know how to say that.
I can't see it.
Yeah, I know it's a hard to pronounce name. I'd just be butchering it.
What does it look like? Try.
Vergennes, I guess, or I really don't know. A number of telephone wires snapped, while many apples, pears, and plums were blown off the trees. Additional damage to fruit and shade trees occurred in Middlebury and Winooski. The city of Burlington experienced its worst storm in many years. Winds downed all telephone and telegraph wires, whereas many trees had suffered tree damage. Some homes were de-roofed. In New Hampshire, the storm left wind damage in the city of Nashua. Winds tore roofs off a number of buildings, with several roofs landing on the streets or telephone wires. Chimneys in each section of the city collapsed. Many people nearly escaped injury or death. In Nashua and the city of Brookline and Hollis, thousands of dollars in losses occurred to apple crops, described as practically ruined. The city of Manchester was affected by one of the most furious windstorms which visited this city in years. Telephone and telegraph communications were nearly completely out for several hours, while windows shattered and trees snapped. Street railway traffic experienced delays. In Maine, the storm downed trees and chimneys and caused property damage in the vicinity of Bidford. Damage from the storm throughout the United States exceeded $34 million. This is the last slide I think we're going to get to, because this now is, get this, from September 12th to September 14th, the extratropical remnants of the Galveston hurricane affected 6 Canadian provinces, resulting in severe damage and extensive loss of life. In Ontario, the storm surge in Lake Ontario ranged from 8 to 10 feet, wreaking havoc on vessels, breaching several boats, destroying a number of boats, and setting some others adrift. Many other vessels canceled or postponed their departures. Winds reached as high as 77 miles per hour in Toronto, breaking windows throughout the city. A fire broke out at a flour mill in Paris, and the flames were fanned out by the storm, resulting in $350,000 in damage to the mill and 50 other stores and offices. High winds downed electrical, telegraph, and telephone lines in many areas. Total crop damage in Ontario alone amounted to $1 million. Impact to crops was particularly severe at St. Catharines, where many apple, peach, pear, and plum orchards were extensively damaged, with a loss of thousands of dollars. One person died in Niagara Falls when a man attempted to remove debris from a pump station, but he was swept away into the river instead. Maximum rainfall in Canada reached 3.9 inches in Pierce, Quebec. In Nova Scotia, damage was reported in the Halifax area. A plethora of fences and trees fell over, while windows shattered and a house under construction collapsed. 2 schooners were driven ashore at Sydney, and a brigantine which was also beached at Cape Breton Island. Another schooner, known as Greta, capsized over shore Cape Breton Island near Low Point, with the fate of the crew being unknown. On Prince Edward Island, a few barns, a windmill, and a lobster factory were destroyed. Falling trees downed about 40 electrical wires. A house suffered damage after its own chimney fell and collapsed through the roof. Strong winds also tossed a boxcar from its track. A bridge and wharf at St. Peter's Bay were damaged. Fruit crops were almost entirely ruined throughout Prince Edward Island. The majority of loss of life in Canada occurred due to numerous shipwrecks off the coast of St. Pierre and Miquelon, Newfoundland, and Prince Edward Island. The overall death toll in Canadian waters is estimated to be between 52 and 232, making this at least the 8th deadliest hurricane to affect Canada. The large discrepancy between the fatality figures is due to the fact that many people were reported missing. Thus, the exact number of deaths is unknown. After striking Newfoundland later that day, the extratropical storm entered the far North Atlantic Ocean and weakened, with the remnants last observed near Iceland on Saturday, September 15th, before finally dissipating. And I think this is where we're going to stop. So,
well, Nick, can I just say it's been a fucking pleasure. It really has been a pleasure doing this show, and it was really the most interesting one that, honestly, It's been really, really good. Definitely. I just want to thank you for putting on that effort. Hey Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy.
He's a little tiny bit late.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank Nick for putting that effort in tonight. I want to thank all the viewers for coming on and watching and supporting. You will see part 2 tomorrow night on Frighteners. Next week, guys, we are doing the Jill Dando case, the one I'm so excited for. What would you like to say before we go, my friend?
Are you talking to me or Rosie?
I wanted to say that I like. Oh, you're pointing the wrong direction. Okay.
Yeah, wrong direction.
She's like, I don't know who. Somebody just go. That this was in the 1900s, right? 1900 or 1890.
1900. Yeah.
So if you imagine how many millions and hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're saying in damage that was then, and then you like multiply it times like 3 or 4 or 5, then it would be like how much millions of dollars of damage that would be now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Oh my God. The cost of it would be just. I don't even know really what word to say. Linda makes a great point. In 1961, Hurricane Carla was occurring during her birthday party. That also occurred in Galveston. Started north of South America, traveled to Texas, and it also reached a Category 4.
Oh, 145 miles per hour.
Yeah, it also spawned tornadoes, too, if that wasn't enough.
Oh, that must have been scary, definitely.
But I really appreciate. I just want to say I really appreciate it though for you guys allowing me to present this, and I'm really looking forward to part 2. But definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, I mean, it is a pretty sad story, and things are going to get a lot. I can certainly promise you that it's going to get a lot sadder tomorrow.
I'm glad you picked this subject because it actually has a lot of places that I live. Like I've lived in Texas. I'm right next to Arkansas, and the guy was schooled in Little Rock. And then I live in Oklahoma, and you said after where it was at in Galveston, which I'm right next to. It came to Oklahoma.
Well, and also too at that time, because you notice I called it Oklahoma Territory. Oklahoma wasn't even a state yet until 1907, so it was still a territory at that time.
It's crazy.
So it's even more crazy
than places that are like places I go to all the time.
Well, it's even more crazy that it also affected Chicago. So even our city has suffered the wrath of the
away.
It's just crazy to think, like, by reading, what I presented, it was
the scale of damage of its outreach of damage.
I mean, it's like as if the storm wanted to live long enough to basically try to go through as many states as it could, do its damage. And not just states, also the provinces of Canada, do its damage, and then it was gone. So,
without a doubt. And Linda says it's amazing how they travel. Thanks, Nick, for doing the weather. He would make the perfect weatherman. You'd see him on CNN.
Maybe not CNN because that's more political stuff. But yeah, maybe more the Weather Channel or something.
Yeah, I wouldn't be on CNN either. More like the History Channel.
Probably History Channel as well.
I actually talked to Jeremy at one point. I don't know. I'm sure he's probably still on, but I actually once approached him with the idea, not necessarily if I would do it. I mean, maybe I would every once in a while, but like come up with some kind of weather show, like weather forecasting for the paranormal community. Like if you got an investigation coming up, here's what you're going to expect.
That would be hilarious.
And in the north, you've got bullshitters. In the south, you've got many spirits tonight.
And then you've got some dogs. The trespass stole your snacks. No.
Definitely. But tune in tomorrow night, guys, for part 2. Definitely. But definitely, guys, tune in for part 2 tomorrow night. Do not miss it. And we will see you next week as we talk about the Jill Dando case and what's came to light. It's definitely raining ghosts and goblins. Speak to you real soon. Night, all.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, but no, my hands are so jingly. that